Okay, let's start. Um, I'm going to ask you as usual if you have any questions before we begin. Hi, Rachel. Any questions from anyone? All right. Okay. So here is what I'm going to do today. We're still working on realism and perspective. So I want to first talk very briefly about your final assignment because, although it's not coming that soon, it is coming up. So I want you to be prepared for that. So very briefly, I'll share my screen. I'll go to Canvas, show you what I have, kind of recap that. And then I'm going to finish talking about the presentation and realism and perspective to prepare you for the quiz. One more thing to say before that is most of you submitted your module 3 work. We're working on marking that. I temporarily kind of disabled your view of your marks for now because we're still working on that, and we will be working on the marking until March 24th. So around like probably by March 2025, I will open for you to view your marks. Okay, so if the message on Canvas says that is why. Any questions on that? Can you hear me well? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so perfect. All right, so all the information about your final assignment is at the very end of the Canvas in the last module, which is appropriately called final assignment. Okay, so these two ones that you're looking at, don't worry about them. You will not see that. Here is what I have for you. So your final assignment has two parts. The part number one is you are submitting a visual essay. Part number two, you're looking at 3 visual essays submitted by other students, and you are interpreting them using words. Okay, so number one, you're submitting your visual essay by April 16. By April 30th, you are submitting your interpretation of the 3 other visual essays. So what I have here is this. I have here visual, the assignment itself. And if I open that, it gives you complete breakthrough of what the breakdown of what you need to do. Okay, kind of like it's a template. Slide 1, it has to be PowerPoint turned into PDF or just PowerPoint. So slide 1, this is what you do. Slide 2 and 3, this is what you do. Slide 4, etc., etc. So take a look at this. In addition to that, okay, let's go back. Of course, my computer just wants to be extremely slow today. Okay, so in addition to that, I have 2 samples for you from last semester from students. They are very different visual essays, and both of them gotten A's. So they have slight kind of slight shortcomings, and I will point them out later when we discuss the assignment. But if you open that up, and it downloads for you, it will, you will see the actual example of what your visual essay should be. Okay, so okay, it's loading. There you go. So your visual essay, and I suggest that you concentrate on that. Don't think about part 2 at this point. Your visual essay has to have a title and a thesis statement. So kind of think about a thesis statement that you would do based on our class material if you were to write maybe 6-page paper, 8-page paper, something like that. We're not writing that paper, right? We're not. We're just coming up with a thesis statement. So this is the thesis statement of this student. I didn't include the name obviously for privacy, but this is a very good visual essay. So this is the part, and then you see the actual essay itself. So visual essay is the essay that is for which images are used. We're not using words at all, except here we're giving it a name and we're giving it a thesis. Other than that, the rest of it are images. And my template tells you how to organize your images. This is basic. This is it. So you have introduction, 3 arguments, and conclusion. And then I'm asking you to give me the links to the images. Okay. So this is example number 1, and you also have example number 2 over there to help you with that. In addition to that, I also have here, so this is example number 1, sample number 2. Last semester, we did a practice for the final assignment where it went over what to do for the assignment, and then people did kind of a practice in groups. We're going to do the same at this time, very early, kind of our first class in April will be dedicated to that. But if you want to start earlier, here is your recording. So the rest of it is really kind of like just the examples, not examples, sorry, the part 2 visual assignment. So this is just a Dropbox. Again, it explains you how to recreate other students' work. I honestly would not worry about it. Again, I would just concentrate on the first part right now, because the second part, in essence, the second part, once you do the first part, is really straightforward. It's really not that hard. And then once we have a session, I'm going to ask you to do some practice exercises. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, ask you if you have questions. Okay, so someone has a mic on and I'm hearing kind of like something in the background. If you please mute yourself, that would be awesome. Because we're hearing your TV. Okay. Okay. I'm kind of going over and okay, I think we're good now. All right. If you have questions, unmute yourself and go for it and ask me. So again, a more detailed explanation of the assignment will happen in the first class in April. I will email everyone, and I highly recommend that at least that I try to attend that session in person here on Zoom, because I will go over every detail and then put you into kind of groups to practice a little bit. And I will also at that point help you with formulating your thesis statement if you need to. If you want to start working earlier on that, and your first step is thinking about a good thesis statement. So if you are interested in doing that, formulate your thesis and email it to either Juliana, Rachel, or me, and we can help you to do that. Once you're done that, really, the rest is pretty straightforward. You need a good thesis. Your thesis could come out of anything related to the topics that we studied. So you will see that the 2 samples that I have, one is on the kind of representation of Black Lives Matter. The other one is on our kind of the idea of semiology of the Nike sign, the swoosh. So anything like that, or anything related, if you use at least one of the terms that we used in class or your textbook is using, that's good for me. You don't need to come up with anything super complicated. You just kind of need to bring it to related to the classwork. So which means that I don't want you to, you know, talk about kind of chemistry and formulas unless you're connected to the classwork. So I understand whatever class material very, very broadly. Okay, so I think that's enough of that. So I'm going to move to here, set us up, slideshow. Okay. All right. So last time we talked about realism and perspective, and we talked about kind of Brunelleschi's invention of perspective, and then we talked about challenges to perspective of different ways. And we started by saying that perspective, in a way, has two meanings. The one is to kind of clarify, to see something from a particular angle, and the other one is more specific to art. How do we organize space based on our knowledge of three-dimensional world onto the two-dimensional world? So kind of that we talked about this idea of the grid, and kind of you map out that grid onto your two-dimensional surface in Renaissance and after. And then we started talking about kind of challenges to perspective. So we talked about Monet and Impressionism, and how Monet doesn't necessarily adhere to every single kind of little rule of perspective. He's interested instead of giving us overall impression of the painting. So he kind of takes painting and makes us pay more attention to color and how we feel about this rather than actual representation. Then we talked about Picasso briefly, and we talked about Demoiselle d'Avignon, I believe, and we talked about Cubism and how Cubism changes the idea of the perspective, because it is asking us to see things from different points of view, from different angles. And we talked about this woman that is in the middle. Remember, we're saying, okay, her face is clearly, we see it from the front, but then we look at her nose, and the nose we clearly see from the side. So there are different viewpoints that we use to combine everything in Cubism to put it into two-dimensional perspective. So that's another very important challenge to that. And then we talked about Jackson Pollock and his work, and how his work completely gets rid of the idea of the perspective altogether, because it's completely abstract. It doesn't have any relation to the outside world, to the representation that we see outside. It's not real representation anymore. It doesn't have that idea of represent. He's not presenting anything to us. Instead, he is taking paint and creates this kind of design with the paint, where he drips paint on the canvas and sees what happens. And by doing that, he completely changes what painting is. Instead of kind of this idea of being a window into the world, that becomes much more of a mechanical thing and much more of a kind of self-contained thing, where we're looking at that and we're thinking about interplay between lines and colors, and we enjoy that or not, based on what we see right here. We're not thinking about, you know, how well a house is represented, for example. So that's where we stopped. So right here, I have the performance of Yves Klein, anthropometries of the blue period and fire paintings from 1960. I'm not going to show you to save time, but it's there on the PowerPoint, so feel free to take a look. What Yves Klein does is he's essentially taking the idea of the nude figure, right? And that is so popular in art, We see here Olympia by Manet. If you've taken modern art courses, you probably know that one. Also photograph here. So there's this tradition of representing female nudity that we've talked about, the gaze, etc. So Klein takes that and he creates this performance that is completely kind of out of this world, related to the idea of the representation of nudity. So all he does is he sets the stage, he sets the performance. He's not even actively painting. So the performance goes like this. There are people sitting in the audience, and there are very large pieces of paper. It's their paper everywhere on stage. It's in the gallery. There are also large cans of oil paint, and the music starts playing. In many cases, he comes in, if clients comes in and says, okay, so we're going to perform for you, and then he moves out. And then several completely naked women, conventional, very attractive, come out, and they put paint on their bodies, and then they, as you can see here, they roll, they move on the canvas, and the idea is to create imprint of your body on canvas. So this is the performance, and this is what the kind of the final product would look like. So these are imprints of their body. Okay, so what happens as a result of that? A few things, how it changes. There is no real depth here at all. The perspective is not any more present. Moreover, if clients takes away the whole artistic representation or artistic rendering, he takes out the, if you will, the mediation. Because normally there is if you paint some, say, a nude figure, there's a model, right? She's nude, she's standing. You are the artist. You look at the model and you paint that, and you have a final result. If clients, in a way, takes away that entire mediation, he takes out the artist himself, and he takes the model, and the model produces the painting for us. So she leaves the imprint. So it's completely different type of representation. So his contribution is the new type of realism, kind of that idea of a realistic representation, because it's the actual body on canvas, on paper, kind of using body as a brush. Kind of living imprint similar to the photograph. Photograph essentially lives with the use of light. It leaves imprint on the paper. So he's kind of using that. He makes it fairly abstract, because it's possible to think that these are bodies, but at the same time he abstracts it quite a bit. And the body substitutes for the hand of the artist. And then the image becomes, of course, less important than the process, because really, if we think about kind of, I'm going to move right now and show you what I showed you before. If we look at this, this looks maybe cool and everything, but it's not as exciting for us to see as actually know the process itself. So the process really filters into a very large degree into the production of the art itself, while very often in the past, like for example, before Jackson Pollock, even with Monet, I'm showing you just the image, and we talk about the image, what he did to create that, who was the model, all that is really secondary. Here the process becomes more important than the art itself. Questions, comments before we go? Okay, all right, so I will show you also Anna Mendieta, but I will go very fast. I'm not even going to stop on on anything in particular. So Ana Mendieta is interesting. She's a Cuban American artist, and she died very young. And she created a body of work that essentially used her own body, mainly in relationship to her environment, and very often inscribed into nature. So she uses that realistic representation of the female body and as herself, but also she again changes our kind of perspective of on female body very, very drastically. So this is the type of work. They are all, most of them are called Untitled. So this is her in different kind of seen differently from she's experimenting with gender fluidity and with kind of race to an extent. Again, the kind of gender presentations. The eerie thing about these is the fact that she created them. She had a very short life, and she was just coming out of grad school when she was creating that. She was involved in a relationship with Carl Andre, who is a minimalist sculptor and who went on. He's still alive. He went on to have a very prolific career. They lived in New York, in New York Meatpacking District, which at that time in the 70s was very much up and becoming, and they were two struggling artists, and they had, you know, they have their bohemian lifestyle. There was a lot of alcohol and kind of a lot of partying, and their apartment was quite high, on like something like 12th floor, something like that. And one night, distraught Carl Andre called the police and said that something happened, and Anna, his partner, jumped off the window. And we really don't know what happened per se, but we know that she either fell off the window or he pushed her, but she fell down to her death. So something like that here seems really incredible, that she, you know, kind of that she would do it while being alive, and then a few years later it actually kind of happened here. But anyways, she's really using her body as a kind of idea of representation, and also changing kind of perspectives of her body. Okay, so from that, I want to look at kind of the idea of embodiment, and I want to look at kind of the digital side of realism. So the idea of embodiment, which is in your quiz as well, embody is to be expression or give a tangible or visible form. So kind of like the idea of actually putting entering into something and really giving life to something. So embodied vision, for example, is vision realized in movies, paintings, photographs, video games. So you embody something if you have a concept of, say, a photograph, and then you come to your friend and you say, listen, pose for me like this, and I will take a picture. So that's your embodied vision, that you embodied it, you actually brought it to life, you make it concrete, more or less concrete and real. So that's the idea of embodiment. So in many ways, all we see are embodied representations. So the digital media then uses that idea of the embodied representation to just give us concrete examples of what we may imagine. And when I'm talking here about digital media in this particular point, I'm mainly talking about computer games. So in digital media, the player kind of connotes the embodiment, interaction with with active world beyond limited experience of looking. So when, as you know, probably better than I do, you watch a show, you are passive. When you play a video game, you, to an extent, get to be involved and decide what you're going to do and how you're going to proceed through the video game. So it's a more active position. Of course, it's very heavily structured for you, but the pleasurable aspect comes from actually having a little bit more of an agency there. So then digital media is very much process oriented. It has emphasis on action and involvement rather than viewing. The episteme, I'll show you in a second I'll tell you in a second what episteme is. Episteme is realism is active participation, kind of embodied experience in the world around us. So the episteme is something that we know about a particular topic at this given time. So let me show you here. So episteme is a structure of knowledge about a particular topic in a given historical period. So culturally based understanding of the concept in any given time. So we talked about ideology, we talked about discourse, we're talking about episteme, and we talked about myth. So this is how we're gonna go. Ideology is the widest. It's kind of like an umbrella. It has a lot of epistemes and a lot of discourses in it. So that's the widest thing. Then we have the discourse. It's slightly narrow. So remember, we talked about discourse of mental health. Everything we know from the beginning of history up to now, everything we have about mental health, that's our discourse. We can talk about historical discourse and contemporary discourse. Episteme is everything that we know at this point about mental health. So everything we believe in. So we no longer believe, for example, that that mental health, that if you are depressed, if you just smile more, you are not going to be depressed anymore. It's stupid. I know what I'm saying is stupid, but I'm just giving you an idea of what it is. So what the current episteme about mental health is that mental health is a very serious condition. It has to be treated. It has to be taken very seriously. And the sooner you start kind of thinking about treating it, the better it is. Okay. So this is our opinion of us as a society. And then nearer to that, we have something that we all kind of believe with. And that could be maybe not all of us, but say group of us. The myth of kind of one of the things that a lot of media tell us right now is that if you exercise regularly, it meant your mental health may improve, right? So exercising helps with mental health. This is the myth. This is kind of a lot more narrow. So again, ideology is wider, discourse is slightly narrow, episteme is narrow and relates only to the contemporary knowledge. Questions, comments before we go further? Okay. So your textbook talks quite a bit about video games and also about kind of this idea of the gender and representation. Again, a presentation of the gender in video games on the representational side, but also in terms of how it caters and who plays video games. So, for example, we know that in 2018. 55% of the players were men and 45 women. there were no gender ambiguity or gender fluidity included in that study. But at the same time, most people who create games and who has voice in creating and designing the games in the game industry are white and Asian males. And women in computer industry are usually treated as outsiders. So there is a lot, I have to say, a lot had changed since, say, 2016 even to now, where there's a lot more, for better or for worse, there are a lot more games catered to women and young girls. And there are a lot of the gaming industries trying to open up for women in terms of the development and etc. as well. So things do change. Okay, so again, I have here a video on cosplay and kind of the idea of the game in real world, but we're not going to deal with that. I want to think about perspective and how video games in particular, how digital media really changes our perspective. And I'm going to actually show you first what I mean, and then we can talk about kind of definitions and whatnot. So digital images present multiplicity, kind of various perspective of virtual world within the same screen. And so here is the actual picture. This is a photograph from 1989. This is a very famous photograph of a man standing in front of a convoy of tanks in the Avenue of Eternal Peace in Beijing in June 5th, 1989. That photograph shows the start of the 1989 Tiananmen Square kind of violence. This is the Tiananmen Square. In 1989, this is the government building. This is kind of the central square in Beijing that is overlooking series of government buildings in 1989. Mainly students, younger people were sitting here to demanding political reforms. We know since then, we know that China became at least economically a lot more open, but politically it's still very closed. So it was a point where there was kind of that very clear glimpse of hope that China will become much more democratic, and a lot of people came and sat in the square very peacefully, kind of hoping and kind of keep showing the signs for kind of demonstrating for that. And for a while, that lasted for about a month, and for like during that time, the government was kind of not sure what to do, and there were elections going on as well. So, and finally, the government decided that they are going to kind of completely put it down. So they sent tanks to Kaibosh to stop the protest. So this was on the cover of the Times magazine in 1989, and that became kind of that emblematic photograph of one man protesting or standing up to this militaristic force. This is what a screenshot of not a photograph of a game would look like. So this is in 2000, and this is Jan Hoddock, who adopts the idea of the kind of how computer games show us the reality. So if I were to compare between the two, right? So if I'm comparing, what do we see? We see that there's a very clear difference in terms of our own involvement. First of all, obviously, we see a lot more, the representation is a lot more crisp. There is less details, and they are very, very, very precise. And it looks very naturalistic. So the tanks are very, very, very similar to reality. But the way we're positioned here as viewers, we're at the top. We're overlooking. We're given the best possible view of everything, right? We're at the top. We see equally well the tank and the person who is standing. Nothing is abstracted, and we're close enough to see the details, which would be completely impossible in this case, in the photograph. So we're brought close, and we're afforded that absolute view of the reality. Okay, so we have then two different perspectives in the digital media. So the Cartesian space is our physical three-dimensional space that can be mathematically measured. That's the space that we live in reality. The virtual space is the space that is electronically constituted, and it resembles physical space, but we cannot measure it because it's ever slightly kind of variates of the Cartesian space. So it gives us a little bit better perspective, for example, on things, etc., etc. And I'll show you an example in a second. So I have an example of a pretty old thing, and I'm sorry it's pixelated. It's the Sims 2 game, and that here I'm showing you isometric perspective. So here is what isometric perspective is. It positions the viewpoint to reveal kind of facets of the environment. So it's usually almost wider, but at the same time, we're looking at things from the top down, or sometimes side view. So this, for example, this is old and very kind of not of greatest quality, but isometric perspective gives us opportunity to see the entire picture, but at the same time, every detail that we need. And if we look at the sim one, the Sim 2 one is really Sims 2 one is really interesting because it really shows us, like, if you're going to try to see where you're standing, where you are as a viewer, you are at the same time in at least two different places. So you are somewhere at the behind the woman in red, and if you're looking at these two women who are coming up, you are somewhere at around the waist of the woman in red. That's where your eyes kind of should be. But then if you're looking at this woman in red, then if you're looking at her, you should be somewhere higher than her and kind of behind her. So what isometric perspective does is it blends for us various views like cubism, but a lot more. So cubism obviously cannot do that, and we can actually see which point we're looking at, while isometric perspective blends all these cubistic viewpoints for us at the same time, and we cannot really pinpoint exactly where we are. We are at the same time in different places. Questions, comments? So virtual, we talk a lot about virtual, kind of like this idea of the virtual reality. So virtual is something that does not exist in real life, right? It's constructed rather than actual real condition, people, etc. So virtual is not necessarily related to the web. Virtual is something that is not it does not exist in reality. All right, so Yell if you have any more questions. In the next couple of minutes, I want to kind of just show you what your book talks about in relation to the quiz. There's a few artworks that I wanted to show you before we go. So this is one of them. H.E. Hill created an installation, the necessary reconditioning of the highly deserving in 2017. So here it's an African American artist that takes on and says, listen, we are like all African American art and culture usually deals with the traumatic experiences of past and present. We have to, one of the things that we need to do is heal and kind of understand that we are deserving of happiness, we are deserving of better life. And he creates this very almost utopian kind of this aspirational installation, as you can see in the gallery, that builds upon kind of more positive feelings and really trying to give people joy. This is an actual swing. So this is a declaration, midnight summit. So he essentially kind of shows kind of different way of existing and of being. Then there is also this work. This is by Tanya Brodsky, and it's called Mixed Feelings. Sorry, I got it cut off a little bit. So Tanya Brodsky is a Californian artist, and she uses, as you can see, these are remnants of the bed frames that she rearranges and redoes to remind us of the playgrounds. Sorry. Okay, there you go. Yeah, so this is, again, she's changing, you know, that change of perspective. Instead of looking at the something that in essence garbage and should be recycled, she's actually incorporates those salvaged works and uses them to kind of to tell us about more happier times. So these are deflated balloons, the lights, kind of the etc. So kind of thinking about that. Then we have, she's an amazing photographer, Francesca Woodman, and she passed away very young. She passed away in her early 20s. She worked with kind of like surrealist photography and tried to update that. So this is Untitled from Polka Dot series. So she's essentially using what surrealists and the early constructivists used. This is kind of early 20th century representation of the same thing. So she's, see how the eye here is looking out of the photo camera right there. So she's like, we would never actually think about the eye in that way. So this is kind of superimposing eye of the camera on eye of the human being. So kind of changing the perspective. The same thing here, we're looking at kind of the idea of just camera looking and kind of zooming in on something that we would not expect. And she is essentially kind of changing perspective on her, and she's always photographing herself in a very kind of imaginary poses where she's almost pretending to be someone that she's not. And then finally, we have something, oh no, something like that. This is anamorphosis. And from here, you don't need to know the geometry here. It's a distorted projection. I'll show you the examples in a second, requiring the viewer to occupy a specific vantage point. And it sometimes uses a special device, both to view a recognizable image. So you can sometimes get like almost like a VR set to see that. And sometimes you can just, it can be, you can just stand in a particular place to see that. So this is, you don't need to remember the definition, you just need to know that the term anamorphosis, I'll show you, this is an anamorphic street art. It's really cool. And it is, from time to time, you'd see that. If I kind of show you what it is, you will see. Depending on where you stand, you see it in a completely different way. This is the actual person who did that, the artist, and this is her work here. This is a different work. Again, this is completely two-dimensional, but this is if you stand at the right place, that's what you see. And then if you are move away, this is what you would see. And then we know that even in 1533, Hans Holbein created this. And if you look at the bottom, he created for us this anamorphic skull, to kind of idea of the memento mori, kind of everything is, nothing is forever, everything dies. Okay, questions, comments? Ideas. Okay. All right. Okay, well, then I will finish and let you go. Email me if you have any more questions. I will post it online. I've got something. The slides are not on the PowerPoint on Canvas. Is there any way to view the slides later besides the video recording? Yeah, I will post either a link to that I will upload on Google Doc today, or just email you the slides. We'll see, but just look for it later today, like probably around 4. Okay. All right. Okay. I will see you later.